Hi, I'm Erin Palmer, Team Rayceen Productions co-host and moderator. Joining me is the goddess of DC, Rayceen Pendarvis.
Bam! Greetings and salutations all.
Joining us is Hnin Khaing. Hi.
Good afternoon. Hello. Thanks for having me.
Please share with our viewers a little bit about your background and who you are.
Sure. So I would like to say that I'm a native Washingtonian, but I'm actually an immigrant from Burma, now known as Myanmar. But I grew up in Washington, D.C. in the late 80s and early 90s here in D.C. in the neighborhoods like Trinidad and H Street, that sort of thing. And then I eventually went to law school after going to elementary school and University of Maryland here in the local DMV. And then, my sort of inner fire to help folks and having seen sort of economic, racial, and ethnic disparities in my own life, I really started to engage in civil rights work. So that's generally my very quick 30-second background. I'm sure I can go into it much more, but I'm not sure that you want me to stay on the mic that long to go into great details, but happy to answer any follow-up questions you might have, Rayceen.
Oh, thank you.
Director, it's great to hear a little bit about your background. Can you tell us all about the DC Office of Human Rights?
Sure, yeah. How much time do you have? So the Office of Human Rights is, as I like to call it, the chief civil rights government agency in the District of Columbia. We have sort of two large umbrellas of core functions. One is what we call our proactive arm that talks about education and training and really works to prevent discrimination in the first place. The other is what we call our responsive arm, and that is when laws have been violated or people feel like they have been subjected to discrimination. They can then file a complaint at our office. And by the way, that complaint filing is cost-free. And that's probably the biggest difference between going to OHR, the Office of Human Rights, versus going to a court. We are like a court in the sense that I don't think folks are super familiar with the fact that OHR actually does provide legal remedies. What I mean by that is that if our office finds that there's been a violation or that there's been discrimination, then we can kind of right that wrong. We can provide monetary compensation like back pay, sometimes future pay. We can also offer reinstatement, again, if we find a violation. So I think it's really important to understand that OHR isn't just sort of this agency that undertakes education around civil rights and human rights, but that we have this really pretty strong enforcement arm or this responsive arm that involves providing real legal remedies to people and the communities that we serve. So I see here on our screen, we have a little visual aid to help us understand some of the laws that we enforce in the District of Columbia. The DC Human Rights Act, as I like to call it, the mother of all of the civil and human rights laws in DC, has 23 protected trades. I like to say, it's graduated from 21, the drinking age, to 23 just this year. And we'll talk about that perhaps later in this segment. But that is we're light years away from some of the federal laws that protect maybe only 7 or 8 protected trades. So as you can see, we are truly, truly fortunate to live, work, play in DC with these 23 protected trades. I'll just take a few seconds here to highlight, what makes these 23 protected traits different from, for instance, the federal laws. So some of the ones that aren't covered under federal law is, for instance, explicitly anyway, number 9, gender identity and expression. That's becoming a very, very significant protection that DC has had on the books for a long time, but federal law is just now catching up. Marital status is another one. You can't be treated differently because of your marital status, right? Personal appearance. You can't be treated differently because of your personal appearance. And by the way, that includes a way in which people wear their hair. And you might have heard about the Crown Act that Congress recently tried to introduce into law. Well, guess what? DC already had this protection on the books under personal appearance since 1977, when the DC Human Rights Act was first enacted. Credit information is another huge win for DC. Advocates had been pushing for that protection for a long time. Again, as you can imagine, you can't be treated differently, for instance, in employment based on your credit history or credit information or credit rating. So really just some highlights of how DC is so different. And I'll just highlight the last one so we can move on, or else I can talk about this forever. Number 17, source of income discrimination, something that is very, very important to have as a protection on the books. And in DC, that is protected. Federally, that is not protected under the Fair Housing Act, but under the DC Human Rights Act, that is protected for our communities.
I love our city. We live in such a wonderful city. It's an amazing city, and all the wonderful things of all these great agencies such as yours does. But tell us, how does the enforcement process work?
Sure. So I want to divide up this visual aid in two parts, if you will. One part is these blue bubbles that you see where it says probable cause, no probable cause, and then the ones on the right that talks about hearing. And so our process is divided into essentially two parts. The first is the investigation part, and the investigation is really looking to see if there's probable cause to believe discrimination occurred. And so all these other bubbles that you see, intake, mediation, investigation, preliminary decision, all that leads up to the end of the investigation, which then will provide a determination as to whether or not there is a legal probable cause to believe discrimination occurred. If the answer is yes, if there is probable cause, then it goes to a public hearing before an administrative law judge. Again, that's similar to going to court, except as I said before, coming to OHR is free. And the other second part I want to highlight is that coming to OHR means that you're not alone. When you go to court, you're sort of on your own to file a case, and you are responsible for presenting and collecting that evidence to put on for the judge or the jury to convince them of your position or your case. Here at OHR, in the investigation portion, OHR is the one actively collecting the evidence so that you don't have to go ahead and expend your resources to collect evidence. And then when you get to the hearing portion, OHR, when there is probable cause finding in private sector cases, OHR will also continue to present the case before the judge. And again, collecting the necessary evidence to prepare for what we call the evidentiary hearing, which is a lot like a trial, except without a jury. So let me back up a little bit for a second here. What does it take to get to that probable cause determination stage? Well, you start with that intake, where you're going to file a complaint with us. And then if that complaint states a claim, we have jurisdiction, we move on to our mandatory mediation. And I want to pause here for a second and say, mediation is really, really important in trying to resolve cases. And so the fact that it's mandatory in DC, again, as opposed to other jurisdictions or even in federal arenas, it's important to note that then the two parties get to come together to try to see if we can't resolve the matter. So if the case does not resolve at mediation, we go into full-blown investigation. And as I mentioned earlier, OHR and our government resources will use that to investigate. What does that mean? What do we do when we investigate? That means that we'll actually go out and interview witnesses, we'll conduct site visits, we'll review records, collect the records, first of all, review the records, make assessment, right? And then make that preliminary decision as to whether or not there is probable cause. So I'm going to pause here. I know that was probably a lot to digest, and see if there are any follow-up questions before I go too far.
Director, I'd love if you could share with our viewers any new laws that apply to the work of the DC Office of Human Rights.
Sure. So there are three sort of distinct new changes that took place in this fiscal year. Of course, fiscal year in DC starts in October. So as of October 1st, 2022, one of the changes has to do with adding to our protected traits. Earlier, I mentioned there were 23 now, and just last year we were 21. So these are the two new protected traits that were added to the Human Rights Act. One is homeless status, two is sealed eviction records. So that means that a person can't be treated differently because of their homeless status. Again, can't be discriminated because a person is in a homeless status. Similarly, with sealed eviction records, someone can't be treated differently because they had an eviction record that was sealed. In fact, there was a law that actually, and this is the second change that I'm going to go right into, this very same law that added sealed eviction record into the Human Rights Act also in some ways explicitly made clear some of the ways in which conduct by housing providers, certain conduct by housing providers could constitute source of income discrimination. I'll give you a really clear example. If a housing provider charges fees or fines or makes the rent higher or different than for applicants who are not using income-based subsidies, then that might be a case of violation of the law for source of income discrimination. So that was the second change that took place in this fiscal year, is that we got 2 new protected traits, and in some ways really make clear what sort of conduct might constitute source of income discrimination in DC. So I'm going to pause there, see if there are any questions around that, and I'll go right into our third change.
That was very thorough. Thank you.
Yes, it was very thorough.
I'm trying not to sound too professorial here, so please interrupt me if I sound too much like that, but I'm used to teaching. And so harassment and its definition was also changed at the end or the beginning of this fiscal year. And this is really a very, very big landslide change, not just for DC, but as a nation. So harassment, which the legal terminology or concept is called hostile work environment. And so before, in a nutshell, what this means is that in order for someone to be able to prevail or be successful in a claim for harassment, it had to be really, really bad, or it had to happen quite often. So that's what we mean by the severe or pervasive standard that we had to use before. And that's the prevailing sort of standard across the country. But a lot of jurisdictions are making these changes now, like DC. You know, we're really pioneers and leaders on this front. And so here in DC, we no longer use this standard of severe or pervasive. Again, it doesn't have to get really, really bad. It doesn't have to be that it happened so many times for it to be a successful claim for harassment. We can look at other factors like, when did it happen? You know, in what context did the harassment occur? Who was in the room when it happened? Was it a supervisor? Was it a coworker? What kind of different roles did the parties involved play in this context? What was the impact like of the harassment conduct? So it's more of a, what we call totality of the circumstances, kind of an approach to looking at this now, rather than this very, very stringent, you know, very, very severe or very, very pervasive standard in order for that claim to be successful. So again, we're sort of leading the charge here in the country. There are very, very few jurisdictions in the country have this new standard. And so that is now applicable. I will make very, very important note here that this new broader standard, if you will, it applies only to, you know, conduct or claims that happened October 1st or later. So what I mean by that is, if you file a claim October 1st, if things happen prior to October 1st, this wouldn't apply. If you filed a claim, let's say November 15th, just using that as an example, and things happen October 1st or 2nd or 3rd, then this would apply. Hope that makes sense.
It does.
And perfect. And then the next new law I want to share about that's coming down the pike for FY24, which we will go into very soon, this October 1st, 2023, is something called Domestic Workers Fairness Act. And so now, starting October 1st, the Human Rights Act will also cover domestic workers. Currently, today, if a domestic worker were subjected to discrimination, they would not be able to file a claim, either in court or with OHR. But starting October 1st, that's going to change. And so we're really working with our community partners and advocates to educate both domestic workers and, you know, individual citizens, residents who might use domestic worker services, they need to know also that this law is also going to become effective starting October 1st. So that is a challenging task, but we are well connected in the community, so we feel confident that we'll try to get to as many folks as possible on this new law that is coming up October 1st, 2023.
Sounds very detailed once again. Briefly tell us about the youth bullying program.
Yes, well, that is really relevant as it is August. And of course, August means back to school. And so I want to share that we have at OHR a very robust youth bullying prevention program. And I just brought on a new manager last year. His name is Ernest Shepard. And so part of our program includes working with our youth, of course, not just ensuring that schools and youth serving agencies have a compliant youth bullying prevention policies and procedures. So that's one part of our youth bullying prevention work, is that we want to make sure these entities that are covered under the law have compliant policies and procedures. But in addition to that sort of policy and compliance work, our manager, you can see his picture now, Mr. Shepard has taken this work one step further. What that means is that he has now started these student discussion series, and that was the other visual you saw before this particular slide, is that he is engaging in specific conversations, confidential conversation with students about what sort of issues they're facing, what bullying looks like today, post-COVID, how we can help, within this new sort of era that we are going into. So we really think that it's an important tool for not just schools, but parents, and not just parents, but especially students, the folks that are impacted by bullying, to have this information, to be educated, and to know that even though they're young and they're the youth, they're protected, right? Because how many times did we feel like when we were growing up, we had no rights, we had no voices? And so we want to empower our young people. I hate to sound cliche-ish, but the young people are the future. And so we want to make sure that they are educated on these protections. And so Ernest works really hard. And so what you're seeing on this current slide is that on August 25th, I think that's next Friday, yes, from 12 to 5, partnering with DYRS. We're going to be there to celebrate back to school, and Ernest will be there to provide you with more information about youth bullying prevention. We'll have probably stickers and buttons and things that you can collect to get the new school year going.
Director, in our remaining moments, can you tell us about any additional upcoming events?
Yeah, I think we have quite a few events coming up. One is on August 30th. We have our Know Your Rights. So as I mentioned at the top of this segment, we have 23 protected traits in DC, and that's a lot, right? To know what they are and what that means and how that applies to each of us. And so we're going to have this huge 23 protected traits discussion on August 30th. And by the way, we have been doing protected traits Tuesdays on our social media campaign, where we talk about each of the protected traits, just focus on one and talk more about it so that we can gain a better understanding of what these protected traits mean to us. So this is a really good one. If you're interested, please attend. And last but not least, Mayor Bowser is having the 6th annual National Maternal and Infant Health Summit on, I believe, September, having trouble seeing the screen here, September 19th. Yep. And so that is going to be at the convention center, and we will be there to talk about all the different rights that our mothers and pregnant individuals have in the district.
Amazing. And please tell our viewers, how can they learn more about the DC Office of Human Rights?
Yes, well, we welcome contact in many, many different ways. You can see on the screen here our address. We're right at 1 Judiciary Square, right on top of the metro station. You can call us at the number indicated on the screen here. You can contact us on our website, ohr.dc.gov, and at the various social media handles you see on your screen. We are just a very passionate team of people at OHR. So really look forward to hearing from the community and, connecting us all to have a better equitable community in DC.
Viewers, please look in the description below for links. Director, thank you so much for joining us and for such a thorough and educational discussion about the DC Office of Human Rights.
Perfect. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
To those watching, please follow Team Rayceen on social media and subscribe to the Team Rayceen YouTube channel.
And viewers, thank you for watching.